Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. We are in Matthew chapter 7 and verse 16, where Jesus gives us the signs how we could tell a false prophet. What is probably more shocking with this is we don't want to believe it. In other words, we read what Jesus said, you will know them by their fruit, and yet we see fruit, or I should say bad fruit, every day, and these false prophets are followed by millions. Millions. I'm talking about within the church too. Now, I'm talking about outside the church, just within the church, where we could go from organization to organization, denomination, independent churches, millions of people that fill huge auditoriums, stadiums, church buildings, and sometimes you can say, I mean, and I get it because I was in it for many years. I could tell you, you watch it and you can see it from your very eyes, and you literally just kind of deny what you're seeing, what your own eyes are seeing. When you see a person that claims to be a healer, when you were drawn to the service because they said, come and get your miracle, and yet not one single miracle happens, okay? And then you just kind of dismiss it. All right, let's get back to it, because some of this is so important. I mean, and I'm telling you, I'm speaking to you from the perspective of being in those churches for many years, okay? Being in those churches for many years and being under pastors, and then these pastors would bring in these so-called big name people. And the only thing that probably was that happened was, you gave them money. Okay. I could tell you several pastors have that I personally know who have died of cancer. And what is always interesting about these pastors is that some of them would go to the other so-called healing ministers. They have made their entire fortune, millionaires, off of exploiting the hopelessness of people. See, when you have terminal cancer, when you have people that are paralyzed, there's no other hope. You come in now, these false teachers, and they are despicable people. You give them false hope by lying to them, saying that you are God's servant and that you hold healing powers in your hands. I'm going to lay my hands on you, and the power of God is going to come out, and you will be healed. Of course, now they what they do, the typical switch and bait. Right? Once you get there, they're going to tell you, oh, but you gotta believe. You have to confess. Think how logical this sounds, right? It would be like if I tell you, here's a phone, right? Here is a phone that has all kinds of information in it. But then I'm going to switch and bait and go, but I'm not going to give you the charger to charge up this phone, right? I'm not going to give you the charger. You got to do that. That's not the best illustration. The problem here that I'm saying is that if a person claims to actually have the power of God coming out of their hands, why wouldn't the power then heal the person? Why would you say it's almost like you see the power, and the power is there, but then you walk away having never benefited from the so-called power that was supposed to come out of your hands. But then you're sent away with saying, hold on to faith. Hold on to faith. Now, of course, Jesus healed. And we're going to read this. People walked away not confessing. People walked away healed. Now, he comes along. Let's go back to verse 15 again. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep clothing. So these false prophets, they come to you with false teaching. How about the prosperity gospel? Right? And I was around when that you go, because they've added a lot of principles since even I've been around since for over 45 years. And I can tell you that they had these laws, these prosperity laws that they taught. And by the way, they still teach them. They still teach them. Despite that the ministers themselves, who are now old, they're in their 70s and 80s now, wobbling around on crutches in a wheelchair. Some of them suffering dementia. Some of them dying of cancer. But here's what they taught you. Here's how they made their millions. The laws of prosperity. The laws of the kingdom. The laws of the kingdom. You got one pastor wife who had to flee her husband. I guess he was beating the crap out of her, and so she fled to another state. Fled to another state. You know what's interesting about that? I know I'm ranting here. I know I'm ranting, but see, here's the problem. Jesus said this, verse 16, you will recognize them by their fruit. And we see this and say, oh, that's not fruit. Right? He said, you'll recognize them by their fruit. Now, at this point, this could be good fruit or you could be bad fruit. He says, beware of false prophets. The fruit here is bad fruit. And we see these ministers over and over that command millions in audiences. People tune in. And yet here Jesus told us in the most simplest way, here's how you can tell. But you know what happens? We override what we see with our own eyes. That's the genius of any salesman. Right? The genius of a salesman, you're not going to find a salesman too much that's going to tell you about how many horsepower the engine has and what kind of torque, that it has. And no, they're gonna tell you how good you look in that car. They're going to tell you, this is you. You got to have this. Well, guess what they teach you in churches? That you are a child of God. You are an heir of Jesus Christ. So you ought to be living with mansions on the hill. You ought to be driving Bentleys and wearing the most expensive suits and watches and stuff. Well, how do you get that? Give to my ministry. Right? Now, here's what happened. Again, I'm telling you, I'm going on a little rant here. Now, watch this. Verse 17 says, in the same way, every good tree produces good fruit, but a bad tree produces bad fruit. A good tree cannot produce bad fruit, neither can a bad tree produce good fruit. Now, let me come back. Notice he says here, no, every tree that doesn't produce fruit is cut down and cast into the fire. Now watch this. So you will recognize them by their fruit. Now, when I first started in some of these teachings, they would say, okay, here are 5 laws, the 5 laws of prosperity. So you tithe, and the tithe usually goes to the church. They would say, well, okay, we can, But then they came up with, well, then you can give to the ministry, right? Give to the ministry. And then if you give to the ministry, you're going to receive 100-fold return. So right before our eyes, they butcher a scripture where Jesus says, that you will, if you give, you will receive a hundredfold return in this lifetime. Of course, they didn't tell you anything about the fact that Jesus also said you will receive a hundredfold wives, hundredfold children. But they took that out, right? They said, well, the lands, we can go with the lands. But what about the wives and the children? All the, See, this is a good example right before our eyes. Then I said, well, if you be a giver, then you would be abundantly blessed by giving, right? So people started giving. Then after a while, people started complaining and saying, where's our money? So then they came out and go, well, see, they kind of modify or move the goalpost. Well, you gotta command your angels to go out and get your money. Well, so people started praying when they were giving. Angels, go out and get my money. Right? Angels, go out and get my money. Yeah, I did all of that. And then after a while, people start complaining. The angels got lost in somewhere. They haven't come back with my money. So then they started coming out with other things. Somebody found a chapter, Deuteronomy 26, where the Israelites brought the tithe in. And they go, oh, I know why y'all not getting y'all money. Y'all not offering the tithe right. So you get an envelope, put your money in, and you hold it up, and you can make this confession based upon Deuteronomy 26. Right? And then you say, Jesus, high priest, we'll offer this to you. Now bring us our money. Well, that didn't work. After a while, people say, well, we still ain't got no money. Then all of a sudden, one of the guys came along and said, well, you have to name your seed. Come on, people. Y'all not naming your seed. So now people was like, okay, I'm giving this money, but I put a name on it. New car, new husband, whatever. And they still go on every time. But you know who do, limit, and they still haven't received the money. People to date, 50 years plus of teaching this prosperity gospel, who's prospered? Who has prospered as a direct result of this, of applying these so-called laws? And I'm not talking about getting your gas bill paid. Okay, I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about all of a sudden, those stuff right there. Where's the wealth? Especially the wealth that they enjoy. See, they enjoy the wealth. I give you a secret. All of the faith teachers have the best, they have access to the best medical care. They got the money, they got the means, the best medical care. You don't. Most people don't. And yet, even to this day, you still see people who we give because we think that if I give, I will receive the hundredfold return. I'm going to receive. People are still waiting on their prosperity. Jesus says you will recognize them by their fruit. So where's the fruit of that ministry? Where's the fruit? Now, the other thing is, of course, there are people that listen to different teachings that, again, motivation, right? The motivational, seeker-friendly, all these kind of ministries here. And, the sad thing is, behind the scenes, and a lot of times the audience they don't see what's going on behind the scenes. There was a pastor, I think he's on trial right now. Actually, I'm going to say he's a former pastor of a huge, huge mega church that he is on trial for literally beating a woman, an elderly woman, in a traffic dispute. I mean, he beat her so bad he put her in the hospital. Now he's on trial for that right now. So here's the thing. Jesus says, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep clothing, but inwardly they're raving wolves. You'll recognize them by their fruit. Then you look at some of the largest ministries, that behind the scenes, what you see is corruption, I mean, just the debauchery, in some cases, drugs. But how do you know that? How can you recognize it? It says you will recognize them by their fruit. Now, I said, let me get into this. What's the difference? What is fruit versus work? See, and it's one of the problems here. One of the problems is that people, they measure a ministry by the works that they're doing. So, for example, here's and this particular, I'm going to get more into it later on, but I'm kind of ranting here because it is frustrating. The callousness by which these ministers operate off of. The callousness is disturbing. But think about this for a moment. Think about missionary work. People get to pat their back by saying, we're doing all this missionary work. So they send a missionary over to a poor country. Or you see them on television, right? You see on television, give to our ministry. And they get these, malnutrition people with bloated stomachs. And you see them feeding them out of a little tin bowl, what looks like slop. And they're saying, we're doing the work of God. Really? That's what you call the work of God? And by the way, you don't even really know what kind of money is actually being spent on that. They're showing you snippets right here. But how about you send some people over there to build up the communities? How about, what are you doing once those cameras goes off? And are they continue getting these little bowls of slop where you see them literally making open fires with these open pits? Some of the stuff is just ridiculous. You think, well, they're doing something work. They're doing a horrible work. A horrible work. If that's all you're doing for those people. And not times with missionaries too. A lot of people, they like to go over there and do the little missionary thing. They go to these little huts and these little villages and stuff. And you call that being a missionary work. That's not a missionary work. See, in other words, what are you really doing to improve the lives of the people other than just that little stuff? Because, I told you, some of the stuff is just so ridiculous. Churches, we have become now just glorified social clubs. Glorified social clubs. So, and the problem is that pastors are not really teaching the Word of God, but they're teaching theology, and I use that word loosely. They're teaching denominationalism, traditions, and the result is, what is the fruit? So you look at the person's work, and by the way, these ministers, these churches, they grow because of marketing strategies. There was an organization. I don't know if it's still around now. I know it was around in the 80s and the 90s. Church growth organizations, church growth. And in these church growth organizations, they were telling people how to grow their churches. Here's how it went. Whenever you have a successful past church, so they come on the scene, they get popular, they grow. Other pastors want to emulate, because they want the growth. They want the growth. I'm going to pick this up in the next study because, again, like I say, I am ranting, but Jesus said you would know them by their fruit. All right. We'll pick this up in the next study. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. I'll see you in the next study.